So that's not how I remembered it.
Yeah.
Do I say that a lot?
Oh, yeah, we had this discussion a whole lot.
So there's a cognitive bias this is a little bit different from our usual, because instead of being sort of a blend of a cognitive bias and a mental model, this has to do with our memory and how our memory functions. So it's called misattribution of memory. It's also called source misattribution. So in other words, we remember most of something accurately, but then we get where it came from incorrect, the source of it, the source of the memory. So we mistakenly attribution a memory to the wrong source. It might be a person.
A lot.
It might be a person or an event, or even sometimes our own imagination. So, so it turns out that my dad, when he said, "Well, you think you said that, but you never really said it," he might have been right sometimes.
Sometimes.
But I still think my memory was better than his. Okay. So there's three parts to this cognitive bias, and the three components.
Okay.
And here's a cool word: cryptomnesia.
What the heck is that?
It's when a person thinks that they created an idea. So think about, I've been thinking about this topic, and I come up with this great idea, only turns out I actually heard it from somewhere, or I read it somewhere, and I didn't remember reading it. So in my mind, I created it.
Yeah,
that's also called inadvertent plagiarism.
Inadvertent. I like that.
It happens. It
Sure
happens.
does.
So there was actually a example of that, but we're coming to that.
Okay.
So that's component number one. Component number two, and these can all be or just one. It's a recipe. It's a cake. So the next one is false memory.
Oh, we've had a lot of those.
Okay. So as hard as it is to accept, sometimes we remember things that never happened. We have a really intense dream, or we imagine something, we like a sleep dream that seems like it actually happened, or we have a really intense, because emotion is part of our memories,
right.
It can play a part in anchoring something that we just imagined or wanted to happen that didn't exactly happen.
Okay.
More often, it's not the whole event, it's some piece of the event.
True.
Like, there was a car parked there. No, it was a green car. No, it was a blue car. No, it was a green car. Yeah. Okay, but we both agree, we were both there, we both know there was a car there. So we got that right, but the details. So, and
Cops
that's
will tell you that.
That's where, yes, this is where the whole thing of eyewitness testimony comes into play. Okay.
Because we ain't as good as we think we are.
Or who was with us at an event, We might remember being, sometimes you say, oh, that was that other girl.
Yeah, a lot of those other girls, by the way.
So, and the third one is really what this is, part of the name of this, source, but it's called source confusion. And that's where, our memories are just they're not photographs, they're not videos, they are constructs in our brain, and they're based on thoughts and feelings and sensory input and imagination.
What else is going on in our environment at the time?
And so sometimes we combine two memories and treat one as if it's the source of the other, the origin of another, when they were actually two separate things. We just sort of blended them together. I think that's another one of those. That's where the cognitive bias part comes in, is because our brain is taking a shortcut. It's like saving memory by combining things. And
it saves memory a lot.
The guy that put this, categorized these into the categories we've been talking about, not enough information, not enough time, not enough meaning. He started with a fourth category that had to do with memory. Okay. And he dropped that out. But I think he kind of combined it in with some of the mental models. Okay. Cognitive biases. Anyway, this one really gets into the memory, and we need to do a whole other video about memories and how they're constructed. But okay, some examples.
Can't wait.
A couple of famous examples. President Ronald Reagan might have. Everybody says, I read this 2 or 3 places, might have, because of course we don't know, experienced this misattribution back in 1980 when he was running for president. And he told a story about a World War I hero. I don't know the details of the story, but it turns out that story was practically identical to a movie
that he was in.
Not that he was in. I looked it up, but it was a World War I movie, a 1944 movie. Sorry, it was made in 1944, but it was about World War I. So he might have had a vivid memory of that movie and thought, oh yeah, that's something that really happened.
Right.
But not to him. I mean, that's where, the memory part is a little fuzzy, because it's, just where did this come from? So there was another one, a study done in 2008 that this was, testing this. They could cause people to think they had visited a place by showing them pictures of the place. Now, the details of the study, you'll have to look in the sources, but people cause people, showing a bunch of pictures,
that did that.
and then there would be some time lapse. I mean, obviously it would be, okay, here's a picture. Have you been there? No, not like that. Okay. And then there was a really famous example that back in 1975, a woman, it was a case of false accusation. Now, in this case, it was a woman. I'm not trying to pick on women, but this woman was raped, and she identified a psychologist as her attacker, and he was arrested for it. The only problem is that at the time that she was attacked, or he was on television in front of a lot of people talking about the unreliability of eyewitness testimony and how to remember the face of a criminal. So she's apparently, they didn't really, nail it down, but apparently she was watching him on TV, and right after that somebody broke into her place and raped her, and she just identified him as her attacker.
Listen,
I mean, it was highly emotionally charged.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And so, it's very fortunate for that guy that he was on TV and everybody, he had a really good alibi. But there was more discussion in the article about, how many people go to jail based on an identification like that might not be accurate, So we know eyewitness testimony is weak. So there's, they're always trying to put things in place.
That's why we have cameras.
If they're not in too big a hurry to prosecute. So, in a more general way, when someone is questioned about something, like they're trying to recall something and someone's trying to help them, if they prompt them with that, instead of asking open-ended questions, if they prompt them and say, well, did he have a gun? Or they assume, they prompt them somehow. Yeah. Because if the memory's a little fuzzy and somebody suggests something, we just want to latch onto that and have more certainty and not be so fuzzy. And so it's very important, if you're asking somebody to recall, not to make any suggestions, because it will likely influence their recall. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how does this?
Kid of doing something, you get that right there.
How does it come up in business?
Yeah,
how could this come up in business? Well, one example would be a customer is trying to return a product. Mm-hmm. Problem is, you don't sell that product. They bought it at another store. Oh, yeah. I'm pretty sure I've done that.
I think we did.
I'm pretty sure I've done that, and I'm pretty sure I've seen it happen.
Oh, yeah, we have seen it happen.
Yeah. And so, that person, that customer at that time could be really remembering that they're confident, really confident that that's where they bought it. And so, it's a legitimate mistake of memory. Okay? And so if we assume, if as store owners, as business owners, we assume, we know about this, we know that memory is fallible, and we just give them the benefit of the doubt instead of thinking they're a crook and treating them badly. We say, you know what, I've done that too, but we don't carry that product, so I can't refund it. Is there another place you might have bought it, that you shop regularly or something? But give them some grace and make it easy for them. Let them save face. You're more likely to have a loyal customer out of that comes back than if you call the police or throw them out of the store. Okay, so that's a business thing. Another one, employees or owners who try to rely too much on their memory. Let's don't name names, but we know about that too. So that increases the odds of them misinforming their employees or colleagues or even a customer. So, it could be just, again, pulling something, they're asked a question and they give an answer and well, it's in the, I put it in such and such, and you go spend a half an hour looking for it and it's not there. And, and then you're wasting time that they're paying you for, and they're angry at you for not finding what they told you was someplace it's not. Another thing would be quoting a price. This is another thing that pretty sensitive area, right? Somebody says, how much is this? And an employee says, the price tag has fallen off. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that's $250, but let me check. Well, right away, that is anchored in that customer's brain. They're expecting to pay $250 for it. And when the employee comes back and says, oh, I was mistaken, it's actually $5. it's going right back on the shelf, and the customer's leaving.
Yep.
So again, try, depending on your memory, instead of saying, I'm not quite sure. I don't want to trust my memory. Let me check. Much better outcome. Okay. How can we avoid that? So not guessing, checking things, creating systems that include double checking. That just train, everybody's trained to double check. Just your memory's great, but double check.
Yeah.
And also consulting records. I can't tell you how many times we've said, oh yeah, we bought that like last year, and we look it up and it's 5 years ago. Time has a way of slipping away. Okay, so the last thing in business is that we can create a supportive, non-blaming culture.
Oh, that would be nice.
Okay, that can really lower the effects of this bias. This bias is going to happen. We all have imperfect memories, and it's going to come up. But if we are, again, have grace about when mistakes happen, learning from them, encouraging everyone to, okay, what can I learn about this, or how can we improve our process, rather than assigning blame and judging, you get just a much healthier workplace. So that is the misattribution of memory, cognitive bias. I hope this has been informative and helpful, and we look forward to seeing you in another video.
I'm always right though, my memory.
Perfect. Bye.